April 1241. Western Poland. In just 72 hours, the greatest concentration of Christian military power ever assembled would be reduced to mountains of corpses and rivers of blood. Duke Henry II of Silesia, known to his people as Henry the Pious for his unwavering faith, stood before an army that stretched beyond the horizon, 100,000 men, some chronicles claimed, though the true number was likely closer to 40,000. Still one of the most formidable forces medieval Europe had ever mustered. Knights Templar, hardened by decades of crusading in the Holy Land, Teutonic knights in their black and white armor, legends of brutality from the Baltic campaigns, Polish nobles who had set aside generations of rivalry, Moravian infantry, German volunteers, even miners from the Silesian hills who had never held a sword but came anyway, driven by terror of what approached from the east. They had heard the stories. Entire cities in Rus vanished overnight, burned so thoroughly that not even stones remained. Populations slaughtered down to the last infant. Kiev, the jewel of Eastern Christendom, reduced to smoking rubble in a matter of days. Armies that outnumbered their attackers destroyed so completely that survivors could be counted on one hand. The enemy was already in Poland. Lublin had fallen. Sandomierz was ash-coalish, smoldered with the stench of burning flesh still hanging in the air. Now they were coming for Silesia, and Henry knew with cold certainty that if they were not stopped here, nothing stood between these demons and the heart of Christian Europe itself. The Mongols were not the mindless savages that terrified scribes would later describe. They were something far worse. They were heirs to Genghis Khan's revolutionary system of warfare, a machine of conquest that had carved an empire from the Pacific Ocean to Europe's doorstep in less than 2 generations. Every warrior was born in the saddle, capable of hitting targets with composite bows while riding at full gallop, surviving on mare's milk and dried meat for weeks, covering distances no European force could imagine. By 1241, they had broken China's great dynasties, annihilated the Islamic powers of Central Asia, and swept through the Rus principalities like a plague. Now, under Beto Khan, grandson of Genghis himself, approximately 20,000 of the most efficient killers on earth had been unleashed on Europe. They had split their forces with surgical precision. One army ravaged Hungary while another, under commanders Bidar and Kaden, marched into Poland to eliminate any threat to their flanks. They were outnumbered 2-1 by Henry's assembled host. The Europeans wore heavier armor, wielded superior steel, and marched under the blessing of the Pope himself. They believed, with every fiber of their being, that God would grant them victory. They were catastrophically wrong. On April 7th, the European army advanced from Legnica in traditional formation. At the center rode the heavy cavalry, each knight encased in chainmail and early plate armor that cost more than an entire village earned in a year. Their war horses, massive destriers bred for power and endurance, snorted and pawed the earth. Banners rippled across the field in a display that would stir any medieval heart. The black cross of the Teutonic Order, the red of the Templars, the white eagle of Poland. It was the combined might of Christendom made flesh, and as they marched, priests moved among the ranks offering blessings and absolution. Then, on the distant horizon, they saw it. Not the heavy dust cloud of a marching army, but something lighter, more restless, moving with unnatural speed. The first Mongol scouts appeared as small figures on small horses, and the knights laughed at the sight. These were the dreaded invaders. Tiny men on half-sized mounts. Surely one proper charge would scatter them like autumn leaves. The Mongols rode closer but stopped just within their own bow range, far beyond that of any European crossbow. Their composite bows, crafted from layers of horn, sinew, and wood, could strike with lethal accuracy at over 350 meters. The riders loosed arrows high into the sky, then wheeled their horses and sped away. Polish knights shouted that they were cowards, fleeing like women, but fleeing was the plan. It was doctrine, perfected over decades of continental conquest. For hours, waves of Mongol horse archers tormented the European lines. They would gallop in, unleash volleys of arrows, and retreat before the heavy cavalry could respond. Each warrior carried roughly 60 arrows, with pack horses trailing behind loaded with hundreds more. 20,000 men, 60 arrows each, over 1 million projectiles, the mathematics of systematic extermination. The Europeans raised shields and endured, but mentally they were breaking. These knights had trained their entire lives for glorious charges and sword-to-sword combat, not to stand helpless as invisible enemies bled them from afar. Horses screamed as shafts found gaps in armor. Men cursed as arrows pierced mail at the joints. The unarmored infantry suffered worst of all, falling in clusters as the sky rained death. Duke Henry ordered his crossbowmen to return fire. But by the time they cranked their weapons and aimed, the Mongols had already slipped beyond range. The Templars begged permission to charge, but Henry refused, knowing too well that breaking formation meant dying in pieces across the plain. Yet holding ground while being slowly torn apart was just as deadly to morale. By sunset, hundreds of Europeans lay dead or groaning. The Mongols had lost perhaps a dozen men. When darkness fell, their campfires dotted the horizon like fallen stars, and then the drums began. A deep rhythmic thunder that rolled through the night, pounding on exhausted nerves, denying sleep. breaking spirits before the real slaughter even began. If this journey into history's darkest chapters resonates with you, if you find yourself drawn to these forgotten horrors that shaped our world, then join us. Subscribe and become part of a community that refuses to let these stories fade into comfortable obscurity, because what happened next would change the course of European history forever. April 8, 1241, dawn broke blood-red across the Polish plain, an omen even the priests struggled to dismiss as coincidence. The European camp was fracturing. Hundreds had died without ever reaching the enemy. Arguments flared between commanders. Polish nobles bickered with the Templars. Teutonic knights demanded immediate attack. Duke Mieszko of Opole threatened to withdraw entirely rather than stand idle and be slaughtered like cattle. Henry understood something had to give. When the Mongol riders reappeared that morning, harassing as before, he made a fateful decision. He ordered Mieszko to lead a partial cavalry charge. Not the whole force, just enough to drive the horse archers away. 2,000 of Poland's finest knights thundered forward, the earth shaking beneath them. Lances lowered, shields locked, a storm of steel and fury. The Mongol light cavalry appeared to panic, turning tail and fleeing. The Polish knights erupted in triumph, finally the vengeance they craved. Mieszko shouted for his men to press forward, to kill them all in the name of Christ. The chase continued for miles, but the Mongols always remained just out of reach, turning occasionally to shoot a few arrows, teasing the pursuit deeper. Some Polish nobles began sensing the trap, but Mieszko, consumed by rage and pride, drove his men further. It was exactly what the Mongols had waited for. The feigned retreat, the masterpiece of steppe warfare, was unfolding to perfection. As the knights became scattered across the plain, their tight formations stretched impossibly thin, the trap was sprung. From hidden slopes and hollows, Mongol heavy cavalry erupted in force. At the same time, light cavalry that had been circling unseen closed in from all directions. Mieszko understood his mistake too late. His men were surrounded, cut off from Henry's main army, stranded on open ground where their heavy armor offered no advantage. What followed was not battle but systematic butchery. The Mongols circled the trapped knights, firing volley after volley into the dense mass of men and horses. When the Europeans tried to charge, they met coordinated counterattacks. When they stood still, arrows rained without mercy. Only when the survivors were weak and broken did the Mongol heavy cavalry move in for the kill. Duke Mieszko fought bravely. Accounts say he struck down a dozen Mongols before 5 arrows pierced his body. His bodyguards made a last stand, singing hymns as they died. Of the 2,000 knights who charged that morning, fewer than 200 returned. The survivors were shattered, some physically wounded, others mentally broken. Speaking of riders who fought like demons, who moved as one mind, who killed without mercy and without sound. That night, the Mongols sent a message to Henry's camp. Duke Mieszko's severed head, packed in salt, accompanied by a note in broken Latin that read simply, "Tomorrow, you." April 9, 1241, the day of annihilation. Henry's war council that morning bordered on hysteria. Nearly a quarter of his army was gone. The Moravian infantry were close to mutiny. Several Polish nobles had slipped away in the night. Retreat was impossible. The Mongols would hunt them down like prey across open country. There was only one option left: stand and fight whatever the cost. Henry chose his ground carefully, a rise near Legnica that gave his archers range and a stream along one flank to guard against encirclement. He arranged his forces defensively, Templars and Teutonic knights at the center, sworn to fight to the death, Polish knights on the right, infantry on the left, with a small reserve behind. When the morning mist lifted, the Mongols appeared, but something looked different. They were setting up strange devices, large pots mounted on wooden carts. The Europeans stared, confused. Were they performing some pagan ritual? Then the devices were ignited and the true horror revealed itself. Thick, choking clouds of black smoke billowed across the field. Chinese gunpowder smoke generators that the Mongols had mastered during their campaigns against the Jin dynasty. Within minutes, order disintegrated. Men could not see beyond a few feet. Commands were lost in coughing and chaos. Units became separated. Banners vanished into the haze, and with them all coordination. Then came the Mongols' most devious trick. Days earlier they had captured Polish prisoners and forced them to learn one phrase, "Uciekaj wszystko stracone, run, all is lost." Now amid the suffocating smoke, Mongol warriors shouted those words in perfect imitation. Polish soldiers, unable to see who was shouting, heard what sounded like familiar voices ordering retreat. Panic spread faster than any weapon. The left wing broke first, fleeing in terror, exposing the center where the Templars and Teutonic knights now stood isolated. The Mongols struck with terrifying precision, maintaining coordination through the chaos by methods that remain mysterious to this day. Light cavalry hit the flanks. Heavy cavalry smashed into weakened clusters. The Knights Templar fought with the conviction of men who believed martyrdom awaited them, forming a circle and fighting until none remained standing. Their Grand Master was later found with 23 arrows in his body, his sword shattered, lying among heaps of Mongol dead. Duke Henry, seeing disaster unfold, made a desperate choice. He raised his banner and rode forward, trying to rally what remained. For a moment it seemed to work. Scattered knights began converging. Then a single Mongol arrow found its mark, striking Henry beneath the arm where his armor plates joined. He swayed but continued fighting until his guards were cut down and he fell from his horse. The remaining resistance broke completely, turning into slaughter that continued for miles. Knights tore off their armor to flee faster. Proud nobles cried for mercy in languages their killers neither understood nor cared to. Henry was found alive but dying. The Mongol commanders offered him swift death as honor for a brave foe, but he refused, saying he would die as he had lived, as a Christian knight. His head was struck from his body and mounted on a spear, paraded through Legnica as proof of victory. Days later, his mother searched the battlefield among thousands of corpses, recognizing him only by his sixth toe on the left foot. By noon it was over. Following custom, the Mongols sliced off the right ear of every fallen enemy to count the dead, filling 9 vast leather sacks. Between 10,000 and 25,000 Europeans lay dead. The entire nobility of Silesia had been wiped out. The Templars and Teutonic Knights suffered such devastating losses that it would take a generation to recover. Mongol losses numbered fewer than 700. Battlefield looked like something from hell itself. Bodies piled so thick that a man could walk hundreds of yards without stepping on earth. The sky darkened with carrion birds circling so densely they blotted out the sun. The smell of death carried for miles. For years afterward, farmers would still unearth bones in their fields. In only 3 days, a smaller Mongol force had completely destroyed one of the largest European armies ever assembled. But the true victory was not just military. It was psychological. It broke Europe's sense of invincibility. News swept across the continent like wildfire. In Paris, King Louis IX ordered new fortifications. In Rome, Pope Gregory IX called for a crusade not to the Holy Land but to defend Europe itself. Even enemies made peace in the face of this external nightmare. Letters from the time revealed the depth of terror. One German chronicler wrote, "The Mongols are the punishment of God for our sins. They fight not as men with honor but as demons with cruelty. Our knights, the finest in Christendom, were as children before them." Europe's salvation came from an unexpected twist. In December 1241, only 8 months after Legnica, the great Khan Genghis died in Mongolia. By Mongol law, every prince had to return for the election of a new Khan. Batu Khan, though frustrated, obeyed. His armies withdrew and Europe was spared. The Mongols would never advance this far west again. But the memory of that defeat burned into Europe's collective consciousness, written in fire and blood. Legnica forced a revolution in military thought. Within a generation, European forces began integrating combined arms tactics, strengthening archery, experimenting with gunpowder. The age of the mounted knight's supremacy had begun its slow death. Professional armies would replace feudal levies. Discipline would matter more than noble valor. Some historians argue that Legnica may have saved Europe by forcing these changes early, so that 2 centuries later when the Ottoman Turks marched in, heirs to Mongol traditions, the continent was ready with organized armies and firearms instead of scattered knights charging to their doom. The ghosts of those 72 hours still whisper across the fields of Poland. The lesson they carry is darker than most care to admit, that faith, courage, and honor mean nothing against an enemy that fights with cold calculation and absolute discipline. That the proud can fall in a single day. That civilization itself hangs by a thread far more fragile than we dare believe. What do you think would have happened if the great Khan had not died that winter? Would Europe have survived a full Mongol invasion? Or would our history be written in an entirely different language today? Share your thoughts below, because these questions still matter. Even now, even here, in the long shadow of Legnica.